sadly, we do have a Bears fan in our presence this evening. I'm Jerry Lineberger, and I'm a member of the Friends of Schmeeckle Reserve, and we are very, very happy to have people turn out in the middle of Snowmageddon tonight. And this is the second in a talk series that the board members suggested that we begin to highlight some of the research that's being done on our campus in the Schmeeckle Reserve. And we are very, very lucky, as you all know, to have a premier facility on our campus where people can actually do research into things that are actually important. So, one of the things that would be important for you to know is that over 5,000 students spent over 11,000 hours in the Schmeeckle Reserve, studying, researching, walking, talking, visiting. That's a lot. That's a lot. And we are just so blessed to have such a thing in our community. I want to make sure you know, too, there's another talk next week, same time, and the topic will be white-tailed deer. And one of the things that we are really proud of as friends is that we started about a year ago, and there are now over 115 friends, members of the Friends of Schmeeckle Reserve. So we're very, very happy with that. The purpose of the Friends is to help to make sure that the Reserve succeeds financially and functionally and socially in our community, and that it is here for those who come after us. So that's part of our goal, is to make sure that we're here to make that process easy. So if you are a member, wonderful. If you're not a member, you'd like to become a member, talk to any of the people who are here tonight from the Reserve or myself. We'd be happy to make sure you know how to do that. So, that being said, I would like to present Shelli, Dubay, and Molly O'Grady. They are going to present tonight on flying squirrels and research in the Reserve. Shelli grew up in Lower Michigan, and by her own admission, she is a troll, meaning that she lives below the bridge.
Around below the bridge.
I made sure that she was okay with me calling her a troll. She completed her MS degree in pathobiology and has a PhD in zoology from the University of Wyoming, and worked for the Arizona Fish and Game Commission, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, before becoming part of the faculty here at UWSP. So we're really happy to have her here tonight. She has conducted research projects on, this is wonderful, ermine parasites, flying squirrels, red-shouldered hawk habitat, and deer diseases, and she believes that she has the best job in the world.
I do.
Yes. Molly grew up on the south side of Chicago, and professional help is available. She is a Bears fan. She completed her associate's degree at the College of DuPage in Glen Ellen, and before coming to UWSP in the fall of 2012, a couple of years ago. Since arriving at UWSP, she's conducted research alongside professors and fellow students covering topics on flying squirrels, fishers, greater prairie chickens, nest detection probability methods, and African wildlife ecology. So, very cool. She graduates with her Bachelor of Science this coming May from UWSP with a major in wildlife ecology research and management. And we are very, very happy to present these two young ladies to talk to you about flying squirrels.
Thank you. Wow. I can only hope that it goes, oh, there we go, it goes as well from here on out. I'm Shelli. I actually did my PhD on flying squirrels as well. On the northern flying squirrel, my field site was in Idaho, and I did my grad work at University of Wyoming. But southern and northern flying squirrels are pretty similar in a lot of ways. They have a few differences that we'll go into down the road here. But we're really excited. Thank you guys for having us. I can talk about squirrels all day. I am a squirrel sympathizer. I have squirrels all in my office. I name the squirrels in my backyard. I have a whole tackle box here that's full of dead animals, and many of them are squirrels. You know, some people use such things for actual tackle. Oh no, I got some squirrels in here. So these all probably occur in Schmeeckle Reserve, so you're welcome to look at those. I also am not very good at sharing, so that's why I have my own tackle box. I don't share with the rest of the wildlife discipline. I need my own dead things. Because I do study parasites and diseases, so I have an affinity for carcasses. So, call me crazy. So we're going to talk today about flying squirrels, and they are extraordinary. you know, in terms of their natural history, in terms of the look about them. I mean, that is cute. There's no getting around it. Even if you don't put a little cap on it, it still is darling. And if they were any bigger, I think we would have hunted them to extinction because they are so soft. They're chinchilla soft. And we have one and we'll pass it around when we're done with it. So you can feel just how soft their fur is. So there's two different species, northerns and southerns. They're both tree-dwelling rodents and they're nocturnal. So many of you may know that they're around. You haven't seen them very often because they're out at night. They are indeed special in the fact that they do not hibernate. So they're active right now. They are small in body size, right? And they huddle. And I'll show you a picture of some squirrels all kind of huddled down in a box in a minute. So they're really kind of interesting for that reason, is that they are not non-hibernating small animals that will all room together in the winter, and that's how they make it through the winter. They have this very broad and flat tail that allows them to be gliding through the air, and they can almost turn 90 degrees using this tail as a rudder. So that can help them try to elude predators and get to where they want to go, particular mast trees or something like this. There's two species, the northern flying squirrel, which is bigger and more docile, and has a different distribution that we'll show you in a minute, and the southern flying squirrel, which is the species that we have mostly now here in Schmeeckle. We used to have both species, and we don't know exactly what's going on. We haven't trapped or identified a northern flying squirrel in Schmeeckle Reserve in a number of years, but back when I was here before, Dr. Hiller, right? Hillier, I was working with him in biology, and we were catching both species at that time. And this was in 2001, so don't know exactly what's going on. Northern flying squirrels are taking a hit in many parts of their range. So Molly's going to talk about the southern flyer, but I can hand her our little specimen.
All right, so this is the southern flying squirrel. Thank you. I would be the one to know how to use it.
She usually tells me what I need to. Yeah.
So this is the southern flying squirrel. Like Dr. Dubay said, it's mostly found. This is the one that's mostly found throughout Schmeeckle. It is the smaller of the two. This is actually a southern flying squirrel, so we will pass this around. One of the ways that you can identify it is that on the front belly here and across the breast, it's very white, whereas with a northern flying squirrel, it's going to be more of a darker color. So that's one great way that you can identify it. Like she had said before, they do congregate in winter. Since they are in these seasonal environments where they're dealing with all these different seasons, they do need to be with each other huddled in the nest boxes or in natural cavities. And what they're doing is actually, it's called thermoregulation, and they're congregating with each other to actually insulate the heat within the cavities that they're in, and also to save energy. So that's one of the main reasons why they huddle in those boxes. They are found a little bit more north as well, just as the northern flying squirrel, not as far, and they believe this is tied to their diet of acorns.
Yeah, mast trees. So this is a picture from my PhD. These are all northern flying squirrels. You can see they do look a little darker. If one of them would just turn over, we could ask it to look at its chest, but that's not the way it works. All 20 or 25 squirrels would all be in one box, and I would call it Squirrel House Rock, because there would be squirrels flying around, gliding around at night, and then because I had captive squirrels for my PhD, I was doing a diet study, and then just like clockwork, right before sunrise, they would all go into a box, and somebody in this group, I think I know who it was making the decisions for this group, and they would all go in the same box. So I had 5 nest boxes up in the room, and I would just, I could touch the bottom of them to see which one they were using that week. And then I would take the boxes down and power wash them every Monday and weigh every squirrel every Monday. And so they hated it. They would get in a coffee can. And so they knew I would come in, and they knew my voice, and I'd say, "Good morning," and I could hear this little chattering going on. And so they didn't like that very well at all. But it was important for disease control concerns to go and power wash these boxes. But every time we would look in there and say all of them in there together, thermoregulating. Yeah, that's great. So you can, they're really, really soft. It's really amazing. So this is a northern flying squirrel from my graduate work. This was kind of a young one. You can kind of tell that their bellies are a little darker, particularly on the chest. And they're larger, and they actually are not as aggressive. They're bigger and a little more docile than the southern flying squirrel. And they are a keystone species in the Pacific Northwest, where they eat a lot of epigeous and hypogeous fungi, so fungi that will fruit underneath the leaf litter or even come out. And then they will disperse the spores of all of those fungi around, especially in disturbed areas, because those fungi are mycorrhizal, so they are required by the tree for nutrient uptake. So in a disturbed site, it's something like, who knew, a gliding squirrel that would inoculate the soil with these spores of these particularly important fungi. So that was part of my PhD, was trying to figure out, why do they eat this? Why in the world, if you can glide, why would you be going on the ground to dig up these truffles, right? It doesn't seem like it makes any sense, because they're much more vulnerable on the ground. With all this extra skin and they're, on the ground, it's very uncomfortable looking when they're walking. So they are very important in the Pacific Northwest. Their diets are quite variable. Did you want to do this one, or am I supposed to do this one? Okay, I don't know.
This is yours.
This is mine, okay. I guess, again, she has to tell me what I need. So the northern flying squirrel eats a lot of fungi and lichens. And the southern flying squirrel has a little bit more of a cosmopolitan diet. It'll eat nuts and seeds, insects. They are particularly tied to mast trees. So in areas they have a lot of oaks, they seem to do rather well, and they don't, in certain times of the year, like winter, they don't stray as far from those mast-producing trees as they would other times of the year. Owl food, like it or not, that is, they are nocturnal. Other things that are active at night can eat them and actually can catch them, right? So we're looking at owls here primarily. Although martins will also go into the nesting cavities and eat them. And so those seem to be the primary predators. There's very little overlap in the distribution of the two species, except in certain areas like Schmeeckle Reserve. So we were very, very fortunate when both species were here relatively commonly, because it was not a very likely for them both to occur. So in these areas of overlap, where there's sympatric populations of northern flying squirrels and southern flying squirrels, it does us good to actually do the research there, because we're trying to figure out with things like global climate change, northern flying squirrel ranges seem to be rescinding to the north, and southern flying squirrel ranges seem to be expanding. So what's going on in that area? And there's actually been some hybridization where flying squirrel of northern and southern have mated and produced offspring. And that's no good. We would like to keep the northerns and the southerns separate in terms of breeding. So one of the interesting kind of aspects you can see here is, here's the northern flying squirrel, and then here's what I would call the eastern flying squirrel. That's what, I think this is yours, right?
Yeah, it's okay.
See?
Okay, so as she said, we have the northern flying squirrel over here. Northern can be found west across Canada, and then also down here closer, to Wisconsin. But then if you look at the southern is actually, it's more of an eastern flying squirrel, Dr. Dubay likes to say, because they're actually mostly over in the east. You can find them a little bit down here. It's kind of hard to see with this map, that's why we put the circles on there. But you can often find southern flying squirrels more in like a hardwood forest, whereas the northern are found more in a coniferous area. But like she had said before, in Schmeeckle, that's kind of right where those two habitats kind of meet. So we used to see northern flying squirrels and southern flying squirrels. So that's
in that really narrow band you can see right there. It's not very big, where they could both possibly occur. So we're just really fortunate to have both species here, or at least we did at one time. So I think Rocky was a southern flying squirrel because he's Boston. And, you know, northern flying squirrels are more docile. And this is what you would expect from a southern flying squirrel, vintage southern flying squirrel face. So, distinct ranges with very little overlap. Why is that the case? You know, is it diet? Is it that they just don't eat the same things? They do seem to have, like Molly mentioned, a little bit different habitat requirements. That could be partly diet, could be because of their body size. Southerns are more aggressive. They typically will kick the northerns out of nests. They'll either use outdoor nests called drays during the summer, or they'll use the nest boxes that Molly's going to talk about, or they can use cavities. And they usually, at least in our neck of the woods, they use the cavities more often in the winter. It's just too darn cold and the boxes are in a dray where we are. But a friend of mine is studying flying squirrels down at Western Illinois University, and he told me that he had to kick them out of the boxes. Said the squirrels were in their nest boxes, they had just put them up in August, and they were occupying them in October and November, and they felt like they were affecting the distribution, and so they actually plugged up all the holes to the boxes because they were still using them in December. So I think it's just that it's a little bit warmer down there, and they can get away with using the boxes. I don't think I mean, we didn't do that, but we don't do that, but they're not in the boxes right now. Molly just checked them and they're not in the boxes. So it could be habitat related too. Now, being the type of researcher that I am, there's this parasite that's really cool. That it's called Strongyloides robustus, and it's cool because it kills the northern flying squirrels and doesn't kill the southern flying squirrels, and they're so darn similar. So what is it about this parasite that how can it kill southerns and not kill northerns? Well, we don't know. In areas where certain researchers have housed southern flying squirrels and northern flying squirrels together, and they didn't know that the parasite was in the southern flying squirrels, they actually infected the northerns and the northerns died from this. So what's going on out in the wild, we don't really know. So we're thinking that maybe it could act as a biological weapon. So here he is, the biological weapon, or containing the biological weapon that will kill the northerns. And in Schmeeckle, it was a unique opportunity to study this, and so parasite. And this was some work that we did back, 2000, 2001, when I was here just working for 1 year with the folks in biology. And we had an undergrad named John Pauley who was interested in looking at this. John Pauley is now a professor of wildlife at Madison, UW-Madison. So we're thinking, okay, is it present this far north? Do we even have this parasite in the squirrels here? And if so, is that possibly why we're seeing so many fewer northerns and we saw so many in the past? So, and is it occur in both species? So collected poop is a shitty world, you know, it's everywhere. And luckily for me, I can study. That's what I do. And so students will want to work with me. I'm like, do you really know what I do? You know, and I'm all for it, but you get a little dirty in my world. So we just looked for this parasite, and these were animals that were trapped, and Dr. Eric Anderson had kept some fecal matter when they were trapping squirrels, and I said, hey, if you've got some poop, I've got some time and some students that can look in, you know. He said, that'd be great. So it's a convenience sample, and what we were looking for are these eggs, and they're really quite large. We looked inside, did what's called a fecal flotation, and it generates a layer that's easy to identify the eggs in. And sure enough, we found them, and then there was only 11% prevalence, or 1 out of 9 northern flying squirrels, but it's much more common in the southerns. So what does that mean? Does that mean that the southerns are infected, and then when the northerns and southerns will use the same nesting site? So the northerns might use it, and the southerns will come in and use it, and then when the southerns leave, the northerns will come back in, and the feces that are in that box can be infectious then to the northerns, okay? The thing that's kind of convenient about northern flying squirrels is they don't defecate in their nests. So in the squirrels I had in captivity, one of those boxes was a latrine box, and it smelled awful. All of the squirrels went in there and peed and pooped. And then they lived in the other one. That makes good solid sense, right? But every time one of those squirrels would go into that box that was full of pee and poop, they're getting exposed to a lot of fecal matter. So maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. So we definitely, we found that it was here, it was the northernmost distribution of the parasite that had been published.
Is that parasite present in other beasts?
It is, it's in other tree squirrels, yes.
Okay.
And it doesn't always cause pathology. For some reason, it causes problems in northern flying squirrels. We don't quite understand why that is. It's in other tree squirrels though. So the southerns will huddle, and that is an adequate microenvironment for those larvae, right? For those parasite larvae. And then when the northerns will go in there, the larvae actually will burrow into the skin in a hair follicle. And so that's how they go into a new host. And so there's a very short period of time where the larvae are outside of the fecal matter, and then they need to gain entry into a host, because in our climate, this doesn't really work well for parasite larvae. You know, it's really cold. So somehow they're getting this, which is interesting in its own right. So it may influence their distribution out there and we don't know. Other people have also been looking at this in Pennsylvania and in West Virginia, because there's an endangered subspecies of northern flying squirrel in West Virginia, and they're wondering if this plays a role there too. So we'll see. Kind of interesting. Now, on to the nest boxes.
So along with the parasite work that Dr. Dubay was doing, in 2001, they built these nest boxes. How many of you have actually walked through Schmeeckle and seen these? Because there's about 25. Okay, perfect. Well, we've taken all of them down, so you won't see them for a couple weeks now. Because these were placed in 2001, they've been completely filled by the squirrels, so they need to actually be cleaned out and things like that. So that's why you won't see these up. But they were originally built in 2001, and there was 25 of them that were built, so you guys can actually see where the different areas are. And what they were trying to determine was whether or not the flying squirrels would occupy boxes that they had provided nesting with. So we had students with the Wildlife Society who had built these boxes, and they filled some of them with nesting material like wood shavings, and then some of them without nesting material. And they figured, their hypothesis was that the flying squirrels would inhabit the boxes that already had the nesting material, because it's less work for them to have to do, so they could spend more time doing other things that they need. And it's also, the nesting material is an insulative layer along with the nest box, so why wouldn't you use that instead of having to get all of your own stuff and put it into your own box and everything like that. So they built these boxes, and this is when I believe Dr. Anderson was working with the project, and they put them up throughout Schmeeckle. Let's see what the next slide here is. And that is actually, for a long time, after they did their study for a long time, the boxes actually weren't being used, and that's when Leah came in a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, and started working with Dr. Dubay on the nest box research.
Yeah, so there's a flying squirrel project that is a standing project with the Wildlife Society. We have the largest largest student chapter in the nation of the Wildlife Society. And this particular project has been going on for 20 years since Eric Anderson started. So when I started back in 2005, after I left and came back, Eric said, hey, do you want to be involved in this? And so then when students started to come to me, I was like, trapping them is hard. They're not easy species to trap. So if you want to do something kind of with radio collars, that's going to be a heck of a lot harder than if you just do something with the boxes. Because we know that they're occupying the boxes, but we don't know anything about which ones they're in, which ones they avoid. And so Leah's goal was to find the boxes that hadn't been really identified in a number of years, measure some habitat variables, and then determine which boxes are used and which ones aren't used. And she had 3 different potential habitat variables that she thought could explain occupancy. The first was stem density, or stem height, so that's ground cover. The second is mid-layer density, and the top is canopy cover. And so the bottom layer was thought to influence foraging on the ground. The middle layer was thought to influence movement, because the squirrels will go to the top of one tree and then glide down to the base of a tree, scramble up, and glide back down. And they can glide, 200 feet. They can a significant distance. And so that ability to glide could be hindered by that mid-layer, particularly things like buckthorn, right? And then canopy would protect them from those aerial predators like owls. So maybe they would be positively associated with that. So those were all of kind of the working hypotheses for the project. So went out and so nest boxes, surrounded by a dense short shrub layer, an open mid-layer, and a closed canopy would be correlated with nest box use. All right, that was the working hypothesis for these kids. So they measured each of them, canopy cover, mid-layer, and shrub, and they had to be crafty because other forestry type projects hadn't really thought much about the mid-layer. We had talked to some forestry professors, how in the heck do we do this? And so they put all these poles together and they identified the number of stems that were touching it, and so they had to have come up with some way to check in every box what these three variables were. All right, so this I give them a lot of credit for being crafty in how to make these three things happen. So what they found was that the number of stems and stem height, no statistically significant difference than the average number of stems. But the important one was that mid-layer density. You can see the unoccupied boxes on the right had much more dense mid-layer than the occupied boxes on the left. And so thinking that maybe at least here, it's that mid-layer that influenced box use. And so it was, what I loved about it, besides the fact that it was like, go figure this out, and they went and figured it out, and how to measure it, was the fact that they tested a hypothesis and came up with some kind of management. If we wanted to put more boxes up, you don't want to put them where there's a bunch of mid-layer plants, right? You're going to put them somewhere where they're going to use them. It's like, if you build it, will they come? Yeah, as long as you don't have this business in the mid-layer, So why go to the trouble of putting them up? And so it was a really nice research project for Leah and Alex. So mid-layer density is important, but there's other aspects of nest box use that could also influence the squirrels, and that's where Molly's study kind of picks up where Leah and Alex left off.
So once Leah left, we actually have co-leaders of these projects in the Wildlife Society. So a few of us will be the main co-leaders of the project, and we'll come up with the ideas of what we want to test. And one of the ways that we do that, or that we've been taught to do that, is to look at research on the species that you're studying and determine what you already know. So we knew that flying squirrels obviously use these nest boxes, and they also use these cavities to stay warm during the winter time and for that thermal savings. But what we don't know is at what temperature are these flying squirrels actually leaving these nest boxes and searching for these natural cavities. There's a certain point around, I would say maybe late October to November, that the flying squirrels will actually leave these nest boxes and start searching for those cavities, because the cavities have been known to be warmer. So that was kind of the question that we wanted to ask was, well, what is this temperature? Because through the research that we were looking at, there was no exact temperature saying, this is the temperature that flying squirrels leave the nest boxes and start searching for these natural cavities. So how did we do this? Well, we used these nifty new little tools, I would say, called eye buttons. And eye buttons, from, at least with our knowledge, have not been used with flying squirrel studies specifically. They've been used to study cavities, the different temperatures of cavities, but they have not been used specifically with flying squirrels. So that was one thing that we thought would be really great. Let's use a tool that hasn't been used. So eye buttons are these little guys here, and they're actually pretty small, like the size of those little silver batteries that you would see. And they're actually these little computer chips that are enclosed in these 16 millimeter thick stainless steel cans, and the reason that they're enclosed in those is to withstand harsh environments. So it's perfect for our study because the nest boxes are high up in the trees, but you're getting exposed to all these different wind conditions, and then plus animals scurrying in and out of the boxes. You want to make sure that it's something that's sturdy. The great thing about this though, and the reason why we used it, is because they can actually detect the temperature, and they give you the time at when that temperature is being recorded. So after you do that and you use these, you can actually download all the information onto a computer and use that for your analysis as well. So that's why these are really convenient, and a lot of wildlife research is starting to use these. Technology is becoming pretty amazing, you could say. So when we asked, like I said before, our question was, at what temperature do these southern flying squirrels start leaving the nest boxes and searching for those natural cavities? So we took the eye buttons and we placed them throughout Schmeeckle, excluding some of the boxes, since These were put up in 2001. A lot of the boxes are damaged on the top. That's why we had to take them down, so we have to fix them. Or they were completely full, or they're completely missing. So we don't know if maybe,
All the blowdowns.
yeah, with the blowdowns and things, some of them got lost. It's been, what, 15, 16 years now since they've been put up. So we did this in the fall time, so fall of 2014, so the fall that just passed. And we put them, inside the boxes and then outside the boxes. And the reason that we do that is because you want the outside temperature to determine what that temperature is that they're leaving. But you also want to know, well, how warm are they inside these boxes? You know, so you want to know the temperature that's inside the box as well. All right. So we had a lot of difficulty with this. One of the greatest things about the Wildlife Society and the reason why it's so important for young students is that you're getting the experience to make the mistakes in a comfortable environment. You won't be able to really do that when you're going for like your master's or your PhD work, so this is a great experience in your undergrad to learn this. So two of my co-leaders on the project had never done a research project before, so we ran into some issues with ordering the eye buttons on time, and then the other issue is that one of the co-leaders put all of the eye buttons out in the boxes without checking to make sure that they were on. So they were out there and they weren't recording anything. So they figured it out after, I think, about 2 weeks of them being out, and then they brought them back in, turned them on, they learned how to use them, which was great, and then they put them back out. And so with that, by that time it was pretty cold, and the squirrels weren't really in the boxes. We found one squirrel that was pretty much inhabiting the boxes, so we figured we can't really answer our original question of what time are they leaving the boxes because they're pretty much already gone. So the other two co-leaders were actually in Dr. Dubay's class for Wildlife 350, which is when you have to conduct your own research, and they determined that southern flyings just gain thermal savings when using nest boxes, which is pretty much kind of what we already knew. So I started thinking about what we could do this semester. So this is my current study, I'm working with two co-leaders and then also two other students in a wildlife class. So what we would like to do is use a controlled experiment to determine the thermal savings of tree cavities versus nest boxes versus the outside temperature. So the reason why this is different than the other study is because when we were doing our research, we haven't found any studies that have actually used a controlled experiment. And what I mean by that is we actually want, since the squirrels aren't in the boxes right now, we actually want to use hand warmers and put them into the boxes so that we know the exact temperature of the object that's inside the box. Because with flying squirrels, it's a little more difficult if you're actually using the species because you don't know their exact temperature unless you have the eye button out there and you're recording for a couple days. So if we know the actual temperature of this hand warmer and we're putting it into these boxes, we can determine how long are the nest boxes holding the heat? How long are these natural cavities holding the heat? And what is the temperature outside? So that's kind of what we plan to test this upcoming semester. So we're actually fixing the boxes right now. So this is a picture from a couple weeks ago. And we bring basically Wildlife Society volunteers out to open up the boxes. And let me tell you, those things were shut. So we've broken a lot of them just by opening them. But once we finish that, we're going to put the boxes back up. We're going to fix a couple, and then we're going to use the eye buttons again. We're going to put them inside the nest boxes. We're going to put them inside natural cavities that do not have any animals that we know of inside of them. And then we're also going to put them outside of the cavities to get the temperature outside of where you're taking the internal temperature, and then also outside those nest boxes where you're taking that internal temperature. So like I said before, placing the hand warmers in specific boxes and cavities. How long does the box hold heat? How long does the cavity hold heat? And is there a difference in thermo savings?
So if anybody knows of a really good cavity,
Yeah, right?
because they're not easy to find. You
That's
know,
very
ones
true.
that would be like, this is Shangri-La for flying squirrel. Now, it doesn't mean that there might be in there, and then I guess you'll be figuring out the 14 squirrels that are in there. That's the other
Yeah.
thing, if there's 14 squirrels in there, it's different than if there's 2 squirrels in there.
Yep.
And the savings of, temperature-wise. And some work has been done that shows that it's worth it to live with your buddies in the winter.
Yep.
Not only, one of my friends said when I was doing my PhD, they'll all collect the same food and put it into the nest box, or into the cavity. So my friend said, it's kind of like you living with your friends and being surrounded by tacos all the time. Why would you not do that? It just seems like a good idea. And Yeah, and it's like, well, you have a point there, you know? I imagine lichens are the equivalent of tacos for squirrel, the northern flying squirrel. So we don't know exactly how many are gonna be in the same cabin. So that would be actually really interesting to be able to do this, superimpose like 1 or 2 squirrels versus 3 or 4 versus 7, to see what kind of thermal savings that happens at each of those different, you know, buddies. Number of buddies, you know, but it would really mean that we have to find the cavities. That's the hard, you know, that's
True, or you
that's a
can
little
use
tricky.
multiple hand warmers maybe.
There you go.
And then you have your exact temperature, so you
Yep.
know. Sorry for the conversation over here. One of the other things that we also want to test while we're kind of like a sub-hypotheses is, since in the fall we were trying to determine the temperature that they start leaving the boxes, in the spring we want to try and determine the temperature that they start entering those boxes and leaving the cavities. So we'll see if we have these eye buttons out there and they actually start inhabiting these boxes, we might be able to get an idea of when they're starting to inhabit them and actually get that temperature, but only time will tell, and hopefully they're clean enough for the squirrels to come back into. And then future research. I don't know if you guys can see our carnivorous flying squirrel up here.
It's obviously about to come and destroy that deer. No, it's the what you can get on the internet. You know, we didn't take that picture, but we did bring with us flying squirrel collars and deer collars, so you can see the difference. Next week you have the deer kids coming, right? I think is Andrew coming? Yeah, Andrew's. Yeah, he's been doing the deer project, and he just spent last semester working for the WDNR deer project, and so he took the semester off from school and went and did some work, and then came back just this semester to graduate. So we'll have lots of stories to tell you from working on that project too. But they've been collaring deer, and there was a time when we collared flying squirrels in the reserve. So
Does this throw off their equilibrium, the weight of this?
you know what the rule of thumb, if you will, is to not put a collar on an animal if it exceeds, for a gliding animal, it'd be like 2 to 3% of their body mass. For a terrestrial animal, it's more like 7 to 8% of their body mass. So the real trick, of course, is if you have a collar that's this small, the battery is in this part of it. And so these collars only last for 125 to 150 days, just because you can't saddle that much mass onto something that's small. And so now this can last for 2 years, and so it's a lot easier to trap deer or dart them than to get back the exact squirrel that was wearing this. Enter here, eat at Joe's. It doesn't work that way. To get the same animal back on the air is kind of tricky. So it's a much more short-lived experiment in that.
Didn't you have a lot of collars get chewed off too?
My friend that's been studying them out in Western Illinois, he called me last week and he said all of the squirrels are chewing the antennae because they're all living together right now, right? And I said, yeah, that happens. I think that the rodaire means to gnaw in Greek. Okay, they're going to gnaw on anything that's in there, and that's exactly what he's finding. And he said, man, it's really hard for my student. They have to be right next to the tree because the ping that they're listening for on an antenna that's this small is really hard to find when it's an antenna that's supposed to be this long. And he's also finding that they're slipping their collars. He's finding just the collar, but he's not finding a carcass associated with that collar. And to my knowledge, it's something I should ask Eric about when they were collaring them more regularly in the reserve. That wasn't as much of a problem. We've collared them out at Suez every spring for the last several springs, and they're fine. They stay on, and the animals are moving. So I don't know what's going on with his grad student. He worries that maybe he put him on too big, just to try to not cinch him down.
Yeah.
I think the squirrels here are smarter than the ones that send them.
Well, anything from Illinois. I know, I'm on patrol, I've already told you. Yeah, I'm a Detroit Red Wings fan, so.
Did you want to talk a little bit about the research with the poop that you're doing coming up?
Oh, well, that's kind of our stuff. So Molly, when she was taking all those boxes down, she collected poop, knowing my affinity for such things. and put them in individual, all of the, several fecal samples from a box, because they'll defecate in there. So just this week, I have some students that are going to be looking for that parasite and comparing it among the different stands, because boxes, can you go back to the box map? So the boxes are kind of distributed among several stands, and so what you kind of have are these replicates within a stand. So, so some of the students, so you can see that there would be some poop samples from here, some from here, some from here. So we're going to look to see if the prevalence of the percentage of the animal, I should say, the percentage of the boxes from here that are infected with the parasite differ with different stands. Just because we can and because I'm interested in it, but also because it's a really cool project for the students. Yeah.
Maybe a little bit off topic, but now that you get the map up there, on average, how many squirrels are we talking about? And are they evenly spread throughout the reserve? Are they clustered in places? Or?
Well, I can tell you, I think it was box 2,
yeah,
and I think box 5 were hot spots.
I think we had some.
And then there was
6 too.
And 6, and there were a couple of boxes up here. When I went out with Leah and Alex, they said there's always a squirrel in these boxes.
Yep.
Okay, so there's something about those boxes. Other boxes were always empty, which is part of the reason why we were asking the question about mid-layer density, right? There was one, we checked them in October. There was one box that had a female who looked to be still lactating, and she had a little male with her, and then 2 other squirrels were in that box all together in October. And so there were 4 squirrels in that box, and it was I think it was box 5. And then other boxes are used a little bit more sporadically, but some of these actually had tops that were broken and stuff that Molly had mentioned. So there were some other, what we would call demonic intrusion, I think, that came in. Wasp nest, yeah. There was a dead red squirrel,
We found a red squirrel in one of the boxes too when we were
Yeah.
searching one day. It was alive. It was just in the box, hanging out. So
Especially
especially
since
since the
flying
box has
squirrel
been there
box.
for a long time, they're collecting a lot of, like number 2 is the cleanest box. So I don't know if it's because the squirrel was in there keeping it clean, or if because that's the only box it was using, because it was the only one that's been clean, since
Right,
2001, but, yep.
So it's really kind of sporadic, and the thing that was nice about the other project with the habitat stuff is I was worried that, let's say all of these boxes were used and all of these boxes were not used, which then would make the study a little bit, it wouldn't be as robust a study design. But what ended up happening was, so these boxes were used, these boxes were used, and these boxes were used as an example, and then there were unused boxes interspersed among the used boxes, which made it much, much more, like in terms of study design and pseudo-replication and stuff, it made it much easier for our students.
Could it
So-
be the size of the trees? Aren't some of the trees over there bigger?
Yep.
Or taller than the ones on this side?
Yep, I think that could be, all of the boxes are on the south-facing side of the tree, so they're all on the
And those
exact
are
same side.
Bigger over there.
And it could be, that could come back to, let's just say that there is a canopy layer that is
More
dense,
open.
and then it would choke out the mid-canopy layer. I'm not a forester, but I hear about this kind of business happening from my neighbor who's a forester. So in terms of, his office is right next door to mine. So that could be what's going on. Or it could have something to do with just buckthorn density, or where Schmeeckle has done an excellent job removing buckthorn in certain sites, or not. And so we had talked maybe about doing buckthorn removal around certain boxes that weren't used to see if they start to be used again. We had talked about that. But each time we get a new group of students, like Molly and her compatriots, we just kind of let them decide, here are all of these things. They're all fascinating to us, to the wildlife faculty. Which ones really interest you the most? And then other times, like these eye buttons, that was their idea. They said, why don't we get eye buttons? I said, what are eye buttons?
Or you were like, first you were like, no.
I was like, what, you know that you're gonna have to teach me how to use this. And so they said, fine, you're teachable. We'll help you. And that's typically what's happened this time, it was her idea, their idea. And it's a great one. You know, I'm interested in the physiological ecology of the species too, just as much as the parasites and everything else. So they're just kind of running with this. The next group might be interested in working with Schmeeckle to remove buckthorn in certain areas and looking if the boxes start to be used. One of the other things that this will do is it will get us a baseline for each of these boxes. Which ones are the hot boxes? Which ones are the ones that they typically don't occupy? If everybody's on the same playing field with all of them having the same amount of nest box material in them, then it kind of takes that variable out of the analysis, which is nice, so we can actually test some other things that we think might matter to them.
You know, one of the things, because I'm leaving in May, but two of the other students that I'm working with, they really want to determine, now that we've taken those boxes down, how long does it take for them to inhabit those boxes again? Because, what is it, in Western Illinois, they inhabited them, they put them up in August, they were inhabiting them within a month.
Yeah, it was crazy. I was just like, don't get your hopes up, Chris. I don't know how this is gonna go. And he called me, they're on! We caught 40 squirrels last week. I'm like, how did you do that? We're jealous, you know, we're so excited that.
I just had to show this guy because I wanted one of you guys to determine what kind of flying squirrel.
Yeah, Shelli hair is kind of dark.
You mentioned that the southern flying squirrels eat acorns. How is the oak wilt situation here? Because I noticed
That's a good question.
big area cleared. It looks like there aren't as many boxes in that
Yeah,
area
that's
to
true.
begin with, but
Yep.
have you seen any results of that yet? I know that's only been a year or two, hasn't
And we
it?
haven't been trapping the squirrels, like we haven't been putting the traps out specifically for flying squirrels.
Okay.
But the Small Mammal Project,
They're
when they
catching.
trap, they have been catching flying squirrels in the regular Sherman box traps, the small ones that you see. And they're like, what are you doing in here? We're trying to get voles and mice and things, but they'll go in there at certain times of the year. But that doesn't seem to have changed. That's been constant. If anything, last fall, and actually the fall previous, not this last fall, but the fall before, they were catching more flying squirrels than they'd ever caught in those Sherman traps, and we didn't know what was going on. Some of them, like, they were getting fecal samples for another research project that had been done that year too, with just a class, not something that's more formalized like this. And the Small Mammal Project leader, Tara, would just say, I can't believe we caught 3 flying squirrels this morning. I'm like, what? The Flying Squirrel Project couldn't catch 3 flying squirrels all season. How is that? So it may have just been a lot of flying squirrels out here too. Big population. Yeah.
You're doing all your research in Schmeeckle, obviously. I live 4 blocks from here.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anything in the city. Do you ever see any flying squirrels outside of the reserve?
I know, many of you may know John Houghton. He used to be our associate dean, and he would tell me he'd see flying squirrels. He lives out in Hull, or at least he used to before I moved up north. He said he would see flying squirrels coming into his feeder. All of the people who live around Lake Emily,
But that's in the country. I was just
Yeah.
wondering if you're seeing anything
in the city.
in the, adjacent to.
Yeah.
Maybe
Do you
because
have
they
them
don't
at
have
your
oak
feeder?
trees.
I live on Janik Circle, that's off, not too far from Green Avenue, it's really, we don't have, yeah, it's not country at all, and we had flying squirrels nesting in our yard, and they were using a bird nesting box for several years, and we wouldn't have known they were there, except one day on the daytime, I was trimming a branch, and I spooked the flying squirrel, and it came out and flattened itself against the trunk of the tree and
Yes.
stayed really still. And then when they were nesting, we'd see these little heads sticking
Aw.
out. So they were nesting right in town.
Right in town,
That's
yeah.
that tree's gone, so that was
So they
a
are.
few years
Yes,
ago.
right. Well, and Ron says that they just don't have any fear. They'll come right to this bird feeder right here. It wouldn't surprise me if you had a bird feeder out and if you have trees of sufficient size, then they would be there. They're not that, at least southern flying squirrels. Northerns are a little different. They're a little more picky about their habitats, but the southern flying squirrels can be you can find them in the city. If you
what are
have like
they-
a little woodlot.
What
and you're-
about the other squirrels? Let's say a regular common gray squirrel.
Mm-hmm.
Are they compatible with these other animals?
I would
Because I
say,
got 100 squirrels in
yeah, the wrong kind.
Right.
Well, and They're nocturnal versus diurnal. Okay, so there's that, luckily for the flying squirrels, because they're just so small. You saw, they're not nearly as big. I think in terms of the number of deer mice that something weighs, my world is 25 grams is a deer mouse, so a flying squirrel is 4 deer mice, roughly 100 grams. And I'm like, that's pretty small, in terms of squirrels. And I don't think that there would be any problem. But one thing that we do have to make sure about with these nest boxes is that the holes are small. Okay, they are not going to allow other species of squirrels in them. And so if you looked on the boxes, it's not only the hole is small, but it's reinforced with metal, because otherwise the squirrels would make it bigger. And so we are specifically targeting flyers and not other species. I think that gray squirrels and red squirrels and other species would go in them, as evidenced by the red squirrel occupancy. Yeah. The one, we have a carcass, when they were checking the boxes, they brought me a mummified squirrel body, and it's not a flying squirrel. The skull looks much more like a red squirrel, so we don't know what happened there, if the squirrel got in and couldn't get back out, or if it just was sick or was old and it got in there and just never made its way back out. So we know that they will go in there, but I think there's some separation, at least that we're purposefully trying to exclude some species. We also get white-footed mice in there, deer mice in there. They're pretty arboreal, so the mice will go in there and make their nest. But I'm pretty sure, my money's on the flying squirrel, because they're, pretty bossy. They can make things happen if they want them out there. Yes.
Did you guys want to see, did you want me to pass this around?
Yeah, that's a northern flying squirrel skull. I don't have a southern, but that was one of my research critters that died during my project. So,
did anybody want to see the tackle? I can pass that around.
You're welcome to
dead
look in
animals?
there. Dead animals, some people have.
No?
Yeah, you can come up and look at them. I think they all occur in Schmeeckle. Do you have bog lemmings in Schmeeckle? Maybe not bog lemmings.
Yeah, I think we've
Had them before, so I think everything that's in there is probably on the Schmeeckle mammal list.
You talked about the change in the last 16 years or so. Could some of that be climate disruption?
I think it could be. There are some studies going on right now to identify the range change of the northern flying squirrel. And some, like I said, some of them are endangered subspecies of northern flying squirrel. And so they're very much at the forefront of research on changing populations. It could, I don't know. It's so hard. And they're talking about that same phenomenon with snowshoe hares. And that snowshoe hares are not found where they once were because of that. And so there's actually John Pauley, the kid that published this paper as an undergrad, is now working on that down at Madison.
And we used to get snowshoes in the reserve when we come in.
Yeah, and we used to trap them at Tree Haven, and we don't anymore. Exactly. So that for that reason, it could be there's lots of these more specialized critters that are being moved north.
But it seems like the habitat has to be
Yeah.
big
I
trees.
just had a thought that, maybe one of the reasons that you don't see the overlap, the Venn diagram overlap much, and maybe you're not seeing the northern ones here anymore, is that as the southern ones are infecting the northern ones, basically they die and then you don't have them there anymore, and the southern ones are moving up.
It makes it an opportunity for them. Yeah, I think, that could be happening. That, and then maybe with climate change and all these other factors that a lot of times these changes occur in concert, right?
Right.
Not just single. And which makes the research very tricky. You have to have an elegant study that will tease out all of those particular relationships. And it's really hard when you've got relatively small areas of symmetry in the first place. And a lot of people, up until very recently, this is not something we eat. We still don't eat it. Up until recently, this became more interest to more people because of climate change and things. If we ate this, or if there was something that was particularly important about this organism, then we would know more about it. Just like bats, there's all this flurry of bat research right now because of white nose. right? Well, we didn't know home range sizes of some of these bats. Well, you know what? You should have thought about that. Should have been more interested in them. They aren't going to suck your blood. You know, they're interesting in their own right, but now we wish we had some of that baseline information, just like the stuff you're talking about. It'd be really nice to know the ratios of northerns to southerns in some of these areas, and then we can compare now, or 20 years from now, what they are and where those ratios are changing geographically. Yeah, it would be great to know. I'm glad we at least had both of them documented and some research done on both species in Schmeeckle, at least when they both were here. You know, that Eric was astute enough to kind of get all of that stuff, working on all of that stuff at that time. Yeah.
I must have missed this, but the squirrels, they use the cavities in the winter because it's colder. Why don't they stay there all year long? Why do they move into the box?
I mean, this is just I think sometimes they will use them, but when they're breeding, they don't huddle as much. You know, so the squirrels will start breeding like in March and April, and they can have gesundheit, a couple of different litters, so that one in October had a pretty darn small pup with her, you know, so she must have had a late litter that year. So you wouldn't be using those cavities if you were worried about protecting your young. So males will huddle and spend more time together. But it can get actually too warm, too, you know, in the summer, in the really warm times in the summer. So I think and this is speculation on my part, but it seems like they're driven into the cavities in the fall because they are a better thermal savings for them. And then other natural history things kind of kick in, like breeding and foraging. When there's a lot of other things available for them to eat, they might disperse around the landscape more, and so they might only have one animal in a cavity or in a dray with an outdoor nest, and that because all that area has a bunch of food, or it's easy to glide through there or whatever, you know.
It sounds like they have tall trees.
Thank you, Shelli.
Thank you guys. Great questions.
Thank you very much. I'm reminded again how lucky we are to be in a community that has a university, that has smart people who have the resources and the wit to do research. And I'm very appreciative for that. So thank you.
Like I said, I have the best job in the world. I get to interact with people like Molly and keep me young and make me learn about